She was 14 years old, starving and standing in the rain when he offered her money instead of a home. 15 years later, she walked into his boardroom holding the one thing that could save him, and the one thing that could destroy the man who tried to bury him. Geonu built an empire on fear. He never once feared losing it, until the one person he never controlled came back to save it. Chapter 1 begins in the rain, before the empire, before the betrayal. When a mafia boss met a teenage girl who refused to be afraid of him. If you believe the people we save end up saving us back, hit subscribe now. This story's just getting started. The rain came down hard that night, the kind that soaked through coats and made the streets of Seoul look like black glass. Geonu walked fast, alone, his coat collar turned up. Behind him, a warehouse deal had just closed. The kind of deal that made men disappear if it went wrong. It hadn't gone wrong. Not for him. He didn't see her until he almost stepped on her. Under the concrete overpass, a girl stood over an old woman lying on a flattened cardboard box. The girl was maybe 14, soaked to the bone, her jaw set hard. Nigerian, Korean, sharp-eyed, already positioned between the stranger and her grandmother before Geonu had even slowed down. "Keep walking," she said. Geonu almost smiled. Nobody talked to him like that. Not grown men, not rivals, not the police. He looked down at the old woman, pale, breathing shallow, clearly dying by inches. He reached into his coat and threw a stack of cash at the girl's feet. Guilt money, the kind he gave without thinking, the way other men gave spare change. She didn't even look down. She kicked it, hard, back into the rain and the gutter water. "We don't need your guilt money," she said. "We need a doctor. If you're going to act like a king, protect your people. Don't just buy them off." For a second, neither of them moved. Rain hit the pavement between them like static. Geonu had killed men for less disrespect. Instead, something in his chest, something he didn't have a name for, told him to stay. "What's your name?" he said. "Obioma." He called for his car. The hospital lights were too bright, too white after the dark of the overpass. Obioma sat in a plastic chair outside the room, her hands still shaking from cold, refusing the blanket a nurse offered her. Geonu stood against the wall, watching her instead of the door. When the doctor came out, he didn't have to say anything. Obioma already knew. She didn't cry. That was what unsettled Geonu most. No tears, just a long, silent breath, like she was folding the grief into a small enough shape to carry. "You have nowhere to go," Geonu said. It wasn't a question. Obioma looked at him, and for the first time there was no defiance in her eyes, just exhaustion and something colder underneath it, something calculating. "I'm not going to be scared of you," she said. "I didn't ask you to be." That was the moment Geonu, a man who owned half the docks in Incheon and had never once let anyone into his life without a reason, brought a stranger's granddaughter into his mansion, not out of charity, because for once someone had looked at his power and refused to bow to it. The mansion had marble floors that echoed every footstep, and guards who watched Obioma the way you'd watch something that might break or bite. She did neither. Within a week, she'd mapped every hallway, memorized every guard's shift, and stopped flinching at the sight of Genu's men cleaning weapons at the kitchen table like it was nothing. It was nothing to them. It became nothing to her too. "You're not scared of anything in this house," Geonu said one evening, watching her do homework at his dining table instead of her own room, like she'd claimed the space simply by refusing to be intimidated out of it. "I'm scared of plenty," Obioma said, not looking up. "Just not of you." He almost laughed. Almost. She didn't fight his world the way he expected her to. She didn't rage against the guards or the money or the quiet fear that walked through every room he entered. Instead, she watched. She noticed which men counted the cash twice. She noticed which invoices didn't match the trucks that came and went. At 15, she started asking questions that made his accountant sweat. "Where does she learn this?" Geonu asked his lieutenant, Kang Min-yi, one night. Min-yi smiled, soft as always. "She's smart, Chairman, smarter than the rest of us, maybe." He said it warmly. Geonu believed him completely, the way he believed the sky was up and the ground was down. Min-yi had run his empire for years without a single complaint, a single argument, a single reason for suspicion. Obioma grew up watching two men, one who ruled through fear and never hid it, and one who served through loyalty and never questioned it. She trusted neither completely. She trusted numbers instead. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't smile at you while they took what wasn't theirs. By 16, she was already faster with a balance sheet than men twice her age. By 18, she'd made her decision. "I'm going to the UK," she told Geonu. "Forensic accounting, corporate finance." He didn't ask her to stay. He'd learned by then that asking her to do anything only made her more certain to do the opposite. "Why finance?" he said instead. Obioma looked at him with the same steady eyes she'd had under that overpass. Because power built on fear collapses eventually. I want to know how to build something that doesn't. She left 3 weeks later. Geonu stood at the gate long after her car disappeared, a strange hollow feeling in his chest. The same one he'd felt in the rain. 15 years worth of consequences already quietly set in motion. 15 years is a long time to build a wall around your heart, and Geonu had built his brick by brick. His empire had grown too. Shipping companies, hotels, construction firms, all of it polished enough to fool the public into thinking he was just another respected businessman. Underneath, the same old currents still ran dark. He didn't call Obioma when the numbers first looked wrong. He waited 3 months watching his own accountant shrug and stall before he picked up the phone. "I need someone I trust," he said. "The company's bleeding money and nobody can tell me why." Obioma had built a career on saying no to men like him. Men who assumed her talent belonged to whoever raised her. She almost said no this time too. Then she thought of the overpass, the hospital chair, the mansion floors that had felt like a cage until she'd learned to walk them like she owned them. "I'll look," she said, "but I work alone, and I report only what I find, not what you want to hear. That's the only kind of report worth having." She arrived in Seoul 2 days later, dressed like the professional she'd become, not the girl who used to eat dinner beside armed men without blinking. She walked into the company as an auditor, not a daughter. Employees who didn't know her history saw only a sharp, unreadable woman with a laptop and no patience for excuses. The first week, nothing seemed unusual. Every report was clean, every signature checked out. Then she found the shipping invoice duplicated under 2 different company names, filed 4 days apart. Then the payment delayed by exactly 48 hours, every single month, like clockwork. Then the small transfer, barely noticeable, a rounding error to anyone who wasn't looking closely, sliding into an account registered in Cyprus. Alone, each one meant nothing. Together they formed a shape. Obioma sat back in her chair at midnight, the office empty except for the hum of the servers, and felt something cold settle into her stomach. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping, this was designed. Someone patient, someone trusted, someone who understood exactly how deep to cut without anyone noticing the bleeding. Until it was too late to save the body. She didn't call Geonu that night. Whoever was doing this had access to everything he touched, which meant until she knew who, she couldn't trust anyone in that building. Not even the people Geonu trusted most. For 2 weeks, Obioma worked in silence, arriving before the staff and leaving after the cleaning crew had gone home. She told no one what she'd found. Not the board, not the executives who greeted her with polite, uneasy smiles. Not Geonu, not yet. Not until she was certain, because a wrong accusation in his world didn't end in an apology. It ended in a body. She traced the shell companies one by one, logistics firms that owned no trucks, consulting agencies that consulted no one. Every fake name led back through a maze of accounts, and every maze led back to the same signature, Genu's own, forged so precisely that even she, staring at it under a magnifying light, had to check it twice against the original. Whoever did this had studied him, had watched him sign 1,000 documents, had learned the exact pressure of his pen, the exact hesitation before his name. That kind of access belonged to almost no one. It belonged to the man who sat 2 doors down from Genu's office. The man who brought him coffee in the mornings and never once raised his voice in a meeting. The man everyone, including Obioma, had grown up trusting simply because Geonu did. Kang Min-yi. She sat with the name on her screen for a long time, the cursor blinking beside it like it was waiting for her to be wrong. She wasn't wrong. The account trail didn't lie. It never had. Every disguised transfer, every falsified invoice, every late payment routed through a company Min-ye's own cousin had quietly registered 8 years earlier. 10 years of slow, patient theft, hidden behind a smile that had fooled a man who trusted almost no one alive. Obioma closed her laptop and sat in the dark office a long time, the city lights bleeding through the window in streaks. She thought about walking into Genu's office that night and telling him everything. She thought about how he'd react, not with questions, but with violence, immediate and irreversible, the kind that would bury the truth along with the man who held it. She thought about the emergency board meeting already whispered about in the hallways, called by Min-ye himself, framed as a rescue. It wasn't a rescue, it was an execution, and Geonu didn't even know his own name was on the list. She had proof now. What she didn't have yet was time. Obioma opened her laptop again and started building the one thing that could stop it, a case airtight enough that even a man blinded by 10 years of trust would have no choice but to see it. Kang Min-yi had always been a patient man. Patience, he'd learned long ago, was worth more than a gun. A gun made noise. Patience made empires disappear quietly, one signature at a time, until the man who built them didn't even recognize the ground under his own feet. He'd started small. A rounding error here, a delayed payment there, back when Obioma was still a teenager doing homework at Geonu's dining table. He hadn't worried about her then. She was a child, sharp but harmless, destined to leave for some foreign university and never look back. He hadn't planned on her coming back. Now she was in the building every day, quiet, unreadable, asking for records in a tone that gave nothing away. Minye smiled at her in the hallways the same way he'd smiled at Geonu for 10 years. Warm, loyal, trustworthy. Underneath the smile, he was watching her closely. He'd made contact with his real partners months ago, investors and financiers who wanted Geonu's legitimate companies stripped bare and handed over once the bankruptcy became official. They'd promised him a piece of everything once the empire collapsed. All he had to do was finish what he'd started and make sure nothing pointed back to him before the final signature. Obioma's audit was the only variable he hadn't accounted for, so he moved first. He called an emergency board meeting, framing it as urgent, unavoidable. The company had reached a point of no return, he told the investors, the lawyers, the senior staff. Only a full surrender of assets could save what remained of Geonu's name. He timed it carefully. Obioma had been quiet for 2 weeks, which meant she either hadn't found anything, or she had and was waiting to strike. Either way, a public meeting, cameras rolling, papers already drafted. It would move faster than she could. Geonu, exhausted and cornered by numbers he didn't fully understand, would sign. Minyi was certain of that. He'd watched the man carry the weight of failing his people for months now. Watched the guilt eat at him in ways violence never had. A tired man signs faster than a frightened one. The night before the meeting, Minye sat alone in his office, looking at the documents one final time. Everything was in place. 10 years, patient and invisible, about to pay out in full. He didn't know that 3 floors above him, Obioma was doing the same thing, reviewing evidence, checking every transfer twice, preparing to walk into that same boardroom holding the one thing he hadn't planned for, the truth. The boardroom was full by the time Obioma arrived. Investors in expensive suits, lawyers with folders already open, executives who wouldn't meet Geonu's eyes. Cameras were set up along the back wall, recording everything exactly as Minyi had arranged. Geonu sat at the head of the table, a pen in his hand and a stack of surrender documents in front of him. He looked older than she'd ever seen him. Not afraid, Geonu didn't do afraid, but tired in a way that went past sleep, the tired of a man who believed he'd failed everyone who depended on him. Minye stood beside him, voice gentle as a funeral hymn. "Chairman, if you sign today, the company may survive. If you wait any longer, there won't be anything left to save." Geonu's pen touched the paper. The doors opened. Every head in the room turned. Obioma walked in wearing a plain black suit, carrying nothing but a laptop and a worn leather folder, her footsteps steady on the polished floor. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She simply crossed the room like she'd already won, though nothing had been decided yet. "Before anyone signs away this company," she said, "I think everyone deserves to know who's actually been stealing it." Minye's smile flickered, just barely, just enough for Obioma to see it and know she was right. She connected her laptop to the projector without asking permission. The first image filled the screen behind her. A decade of falsified contracts laid out in a single damning column. The room went silent. "Forged signatures," she said, clicking through the evidence. "Shell logistics companies with no trucks. Offshore accounts registered to a name that shares a last address with someone in this room." Minyi forced a laugh, thin and unconvincing. "These records are fabricated." "I expected you to say that," Obioma said, and clicked again. A hidden surveillance video filled the screen. Minyi, months earlier, shaking hands with the same investors now seated at this table, promising them ownership once Geonu's empire collapsed. The color drained from his face. 10 years of careful loyalty cracked open in front of everyone who had ever trusted him. Geonu set the pen down slowly, his eyes locked on the man he'd called family for a decade. "Minyi," he said, and his voice had gone somewhere cold and quiet, somewhere Obioma had never heard before. "Tell me she's wrong." Minyi said nothing, his silence answered for him. And in that silence, Obioma understood that the most dangerous part of the night hadn't happened yet for a long moment. Nobody in the boardroom moved. Minye's silence had already convicted him, but silence wasn't enough for Geonu. 10 years of trust doesn't break quietly. It breaks like something structural, something load-bearing, and everyone in the room could feel the walls coming down around him. 10 years, Geonu said low. "I gave you everything, my name, my trust. My daughter grew up calling you uncle." Minye's composure, the soft-spoken mask he'd worn for a decade, finally slipped completely. What was underneath wasn't guilt, it was contempt. You built an empire on fear, he spat, and expected loyalty in return. I built the real foundation. I kept this company running while you played king. I deserved more than a salary and a smile. You could have asked. You never would have given it to me. Geonu's hand moved toward his jacket, toward the weapon he'd carried since long before Obioma was born, the old instinct rising up faster than 15 years of change could suppress it. Security officers froze, unsure whether to intervene or step back. The investors at the table went pale, realizing too late what kind of man they'd been doing business with. Minyi saw the movement and panicked. His hand went for his own weapon, faster, desperate, a cornered man with nothing left to lose. Everyone in the room expected gunfire. Obioma stepped directly between them. She placed one flat hand against Geonu's chest, the same steady hand that had kicked his money back into the rain 15 years earlier, and looked up into his eyes. Not like this, she said. Not anymore. Geonu's jaw was tight, his whole body coiled toward violence, toward the only language he'd ever trusted completely. He tried to destroy everything, he said. I know, and I stopped him, with a laptop, not a bullet. Let the system finish it. I didn't spend 15 years watching you become someone different just to watch you throw it away in front of a room full of cameras. For several long seconds, nothing moved. Minye's gun was still raised, shaking now, his last thread of control unraveling in real time. Then Geonu lowered his weapon. Security rushed forward and disarmed Minyi before he could react, pulling him back as he shouted something no one could quite make out. Rage, maybe, or grief for the loyalty he'd betrayed and lost in the same breath. Geonu didn't watch him go. He was looking at Obioma, seeing her clearly for the first time in 15 years, not as the girl he'd taken in, but as the only person who had ever saved him without asking for anything in return. The company survived, but survival wasn't the same as being whole. In the weeks after the board meeting, Geonu sat in his office late into the night, going through the financial restructuring Obioma had prepared. Not the man who once ruled through fear, but someone quieter, someone still learning what was left of him once the fear stopped working. You could have let me handle him my way, he said one evening, watching her review the last of the shell company closures. I know, Obioma said, not looking up. That's exactly why I didn't. He almost smiled. 15 years and she still refused to flinch at him. Together they began dismantling what remained of the old operation. The shadow contracts, the intimidation routes, the businesses that had only ever existed to launder fear into money. It wasn't fast. It wasn't easy. Longtime associates who had built careers on Geonu's old reputation didn't leave quietly, and more than once Obioma found herself back at a laptop late at night, tracing new resistance the same way she'd traced Minya's theft. But this time, Geonu was beside her, not watching from a distance. Why are you helping me build something new? He asked her once, instead of just walking away with your reputation intact. Obioma thought about the overpass, the rain, the money she'd kicked back into the gutter because guilt wasn't the same as care. Because you didn't buy me off that night, she said. You showed up. That's the only reason any of this is worth saving. Slowly, the empire changed shape. Shipping routes once used to move more than cargo became legitimate again. Slush funds became scholarship funds. The construction firms that had built Geonu's reputation on fear started building something else. Community centers, legal aid clinics, spaces meant for the people he'd once ruled instead of served. It wasn't redemption, exactly. Geonu knew better than to call it that. But it was the first time in his life that his name meant something other than fear, and he owed all of it to a 14-year-old girl who had once refused to be bought. A year later, Geonu stood under the same concrete overpass where it had all begun. The rain fell the same way it had that night, hard, relentless, washing the city clean of everything except memory. Obioma found him there, her coat collar turned up against the cold, the same posture she'd had at 14, except now there was nothing defensive in it, just quiet. You still come here, she said. Every year. He didn't look at her, watching the rain hit the pavement instead. This is where I stopped being just a man people feared. This is where I stopped being just a girl people pitied. He almost laughed. 15 years, and she still had the same instinct to meet his silence with something sharper. I threw money at your feet, he said. You threw it back. You could have walked away. They stood there a moment longer, two people who had built something out of a night neither of them had planned for. Not charity, not guilt, but the rarest thing either of them had ever been offered. Someone who refused to look away. Was it ever really about the money, Obioma asked quietly, or was it about who you'd let yourself become without it? Geonu didn't answer. Some questions, he'd learned, weren't meant to be answered, only carried, the way she'd carried her grandmother's memory, the way he now carried the empire she'd helped him rebuild. The rain kept falling. Neither of them moved to leave.